Story 1. The Loop That Never Ended. Marcus Wellington had been driving 18-wheelers across the American Midwest for 23 years, and he thought he'd seen every inch of Interstate 80 between Chicago and Des Moines. He knew every truck stop, every way station, every mile marker like the back of his weathered hands. On the night of October 14, 2019, that familiarity would become his nightmare. He left the Chicago distribution center at 11:47 p.m. with a full load of automotive parts destined for a warehouse in Council Bluffs, Iowa. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and Marcus had made this exact run hundreds of times before. His GPS showed the familiar route. His CB radio crackled with the usual chatter from other night haulers, and his coffee was hot in the cup holder. Everything was normal until he passed mile marker 87 just outside of Princeton, Illinois. The marker caught his eye because of its condition, freshly painted, gleaming in his headlights. He'd passed that same marker countless times, and it had always been faded and rust-streaked. Marcus shrugged it off, thinking the state had finally done some maintenance. 20 minutes later, he passed mile marker 87 again. Same fresh paint, same position. Impossible. Marcus grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Bear westbound on 80. Anyone else seeing weird mile markers tonight?" Static answered him. He tried again, more static. He checked his phone, no signal, which was strange because this stretch usually had decent coverage. His GPS showed him exactly where he should be, progressing normally westward, but that mile marker was burned into his mind. He kept driving, watching his odometer click forward, watching the GPS trace his path. The road looked identical, same flat farmland on either side, same gentle curves, same lighting. But 30 minutes later, there it was again. Mile marker 87, fresh and gleaming. Marcus felt his hands tighten on the steering wheel. His heart rate picked up. This wasn't possible. He'd driven nearly 40 miles according to his instruments, but that marker proved otherwise. Marcus pulled over to the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. He stepped out into the cool October air, breathing deeply, trying to calm himself. The silence was absolute. No other traffic, no distant farm lights, no sound of wind through the cornfields that should have surrounded him, just silence and darkness beyond the reach of his headlights. He walked to the front of his truck, checked the tires, checked the connections. Everything was normal, everything except the road. He climbed back in and continued driving, this time keeping his eyes locked on the odometer and GPS. Mile after mile ticked by on his instruments. The GPS showed him passing through Walnut, then Atkinson, then Geneseo. But the scenery never changed. The same stretch of road, the same curves, the same everything. And every 30 minutes, like clockwork, mile marker 87 appeared in his headlights. After the fourth loop, Marcus started to panic. He'd been driving for over 2 hours but had somehow traveled nowhere. His fuel gauge showed he'd burned nearly a quarter tank, but the GPS insisted he'd covered over 100 miles. The math didn't work. Reality didn't work. He tried every radio frequency, CB, AM, FM, seeking any human voice. Only static answered. He attempted to exit at what should have been the Atkinson exit, following his GPS instructions. The exit ramp appeared in his headlights exactly as it should. He took it, following the curve, expecting to see the overpass and the frontage road beyond. Instead, the ramp curved back and deposited him on the exact same stretch of westbound Interstate 80. Mile marker 87 appeared 2 minutes later. Marcus was a rational man. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses or supernatural nonsense. But rational thought was collapsing under the weight of impossible reality. He tried driving in reverse, backing up for a mile, then turning around. The moment he started forward again, he was heading west on the same loop. He tried stopping completely for 30 minutes, engine idling, praying this was some kind of exhaustion-induced hallucination. When he started again, mile marker 87 greeted him right on schedule. The sun should have risen by his calculations. He'd been trapped for over 6 hours. His watch showed 6:15 a.m., but the sky remained locked in the same deep night darkness. No hint of dawn. No lightening of the eastern horizon. Just eternal night on an eternal loop of Interstate 80. He began talking to himself, then shouting, then screaming at the windshield. "Let me out! What do you want? What is this?" His voice echoed strangely in the cab, as if the space had grown larger, as if the walls were farther away than they should be. He pounded the steering wheel, tears streaming down his face, terror overwhelming him. That's when he saw the other truck. Headlights in his mirror approaching from behind. Marcus almost sobbed with relief. He grabbed his CB, tried again. "Breaker, breaker, truck behind me on 80, please respond." Static, but the truck was getting closer. Maybe their radio was broken too. Marcus slowed, pulling toward the shoulder, hoping the driver would stop, hoping for any human contact, any proof he wasn't insane. The truck pulled alongside him. Marcus looked across at the driver's window. He saw himself. Not someone who looked like him, himself. Same worn denim jacket, same Chicago Bears cap, same graying beard. The other Marcus stared back with eyes full of terror and recognition. The truck pulled ahead, taillights disappearing into the darkness. 5 minutes later, Marcus saw taillights ahead. He accelerated, desperate to catch them. As he drew closer, he could read the license plate, see the company logo on the trailer doors. His truck, his plates, his cargo. He was chasing himself. The radio crackled suddenly, and his own voice came through, distorted and distant. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Bear westbound on 80. Anyone else seeing weird mile markers tonight?" Marcus understood then. The loop wasn't just spatial, it was temporal. He was trapped in the same stretch of time and space, repeating endlessly, encountering himself at different points in the loop. How many versions of him were circling this cursed piece of highway? How long had he really been here? He stopped trying to escape. What was the point? Instead, he drove mechanically, watching mile marker 87 appear again and again. He counted 37 loops, 52 loops, 78 loops. His watch froze at 6:15 a.m. His fuel gauge stopped decreasing at 1/4 tank. Even the coffee in his cup holder remained exactly the same temperature. On the 114th loop, something changed. He saw a car on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. An older model sedan, empty, driver's door open. He'd never seen anything but his own truck before. He slowed, considering stopping, but fear kept him moving. On the next loop, the car was gone. On the loop after that, it was back, but the door was closed and covered in rust, as if it had been there for years. Marcus began leaving himself messages. He had a notepad and started writing warnings, then tossing the pages out the window. On subsequent loops, he'd see them scattered on the shoulder, hundreds of pages, some fresh, some yellowed with age, some so old they were barely legible. How long had he been here? Years? Decades? His body didn't age, his truck didn't deteriorate, but those pages suggested time was passing outside the loop even if it stood still within it. On loop 267, the road was wet with rain, though no rain fell. On loop 268, snow covered the shoulders, though the temperature in his cab never changed. On loop 305, the pavement was cracked and overgrown with weeds, as if the highway had been abandoned for decades. But the next loop, it was pristine again. He stopped counting after 1,000 loops, stopped leaving messages, stopped feeling anything but a numb acceptance. Marcus Wellington, 23-year veteran driver, was gone. Only the shell remained, driving endlessly, watching mile marker 87 appear in his headlights every 30 minutes for eternity, except eternity ended. On a loop he couldn't number because he'd stopped counting, the sky lightened. Dawn broke. The silence shattered with the sound of a distant train whistle. His radio crackled with actual voices, truckers talking about weather and traffic and normal things. Marcus's watch started moving again. 6:16 a.m., 6:17 a.m., 6:18 a.m. His GPS showed him passing mile marker 88, then 89, then 90. He was free. Marcus drove straight through to Council Bluffs without stopping, delivered his cargo, then drove home to Chicago and quit. His dispatcher said he'd been gone 12 hours, a normal overnight run. Marcus looked at the hundreds of pages of notes he'd kept, describing the loops, the terror, the impossible imprisonment. They were all blank now, just empty paper. He never drove Interstate 80 again. Sometimes late at night, he researches the highway looking for others who experienced the loop. He finds scattered reports, vague stories quickly dismissed. But he knows. Somewhere between mile marker 87 and 88, reality breaks down. And some version of Marcus Wellington is still trapped there, driving endlessly, watching for mile marker 87 to appear in his headlights one more time. Story 2. The town that shouldn't exist. Sarah Chen had been a long-haul trucker for 15 years, specializing in overnight routes through rural America. She preferred the solitude, the empty highways, the way headlights carved tunnels through darkness. On March 3, 2021, she picked up a load of medical supplies in Boise, Idaho, bound for Salt Lake City. The route along Interstate 84 was straightforward and familiar, cutting through the high desert plateau with minimal stops. She departed at 10 p.m., expecting to reach Salt Lake City by 6 a.m. The first 2 hours were uneventful, sparse traffic, clear skies, a waning moon providing minimal light beyond the reach of her headlights. Her fuel tank was full, her GPS showed the route clearly, and her satellite radio played classic rock to keep her alert. At the town of Twin Falls, she stopped briefly for coffee and a restroom break, then continued south. 30 miles past Twin Falls, her GPS started acting strangely. The blue dot representing her truck began drifting off the mapped highway, floating across blank space on the screen. Sarah tapped the unit, thinking it had lost satellite connection, but the signal indicator showed full strength. The blue dot continued its drift, now showing her several miles off I-84 to the east, traveling on a road that didn't exist on the map. Sarah looked at the actual road in front of her. It appeared normal, standard 2-lane interstate, proper markings, reflective signs. But according to the GPS, she wasn't on I-84 anymore. She grabbed her atlas from the passenger seat, checked her location using the last exit sign she'd passed. She should be on a straight stretch with no turns for another 40 miles. There hadn't been any exits, any turnoffs, any way to accidentally leave the interstate. She continued driving, now uneasy. 5 miles later, she saw lights ahead, the glow of a town rising from the desert darkness. Sarah checked her atlas again. There should be nothing out here. The next town of any size was Malta, still 30 miles south. But these lights were substantial, suggesting a community of several thousand people. The town appeared gradually as she crested a gentle rise. Streetlights illuminated downtown buildings, their windows glowing warmly. She could see houses spreading outward, a church steeple, what looked like a water tower. A green sign appeared in her headlights. Welcome to Ashford, population 3,847, established 1952. Sarah had never heard of Ashford. In 15 years of running this route dozens of times, she'd never seen this town. She grabbed her phone to search for it, no signal. The CB radio produced only static. Her satellite radio cut out completely, the screen going dark. Only her headlights and the dashboard lights still functioned. The highway became Main Street as it entered town. Sarah slowed to 35 mph, observing her surroundings carefully. The town looked prosperous and well-maintained, but something felt wrong. The architecture was period correct for the 1950s, Art Deco storefronts, mid-century modern buildings, vintage street lamps, but everything looked brand new. No weathering, no aging, no signs of decades passing, and there were no people. Not a single person walking the sidewalks, no cars parked along the street, no movement in any window, but the lights were on. Every streetlight glowed. Every storefront was illuminated. Every house had lights shining from within. The town was lit up like a stage set, waiting for actors who never arrived. Sarah considered stopping but decided against it. Something about the empty perfection triggered every survival instinct. She maintained steady speed, passing through the downtown district. A movie theater's marquee advertised films from 1952, Singin' in the Rain and The Greatest Show on Earth. A gas station's price sign showed gas at 20 cents per gallon. A diner's neon sign blinked, open 24 hours. But the interior was empty, place settings arranged on every table as if waiting for customers. The town should have ended after a mile or two. Instead, it kept going. Residential streets branched off Main Street, each lined with identical ranch-style houses, each house illuminated from within, each yard perfectly manicured. Sarah glanced down side streets as she passed, seeing the same thing: lights, emptiness, impossible perfection. After 5 miles, the town was still going. Sarah's unease transformed into active fear. She accelerated, pushing to 50 mph, desperate to reach the far edge of this impossible place. The houses continued. The streetlights continued. Everything illuminated, everything empty, everything wrong. She saw the diner again. Same neon sign, same empty interior, same place settings. She'd driven 5 miles, but she was passing the same diner. Sarah's breath came faster. She pushed the accelerator, reaching 60 mph, then 70. The town blurred past, an endless repetition of the same blocks, the same buildings, the same church steeple always visible in the distance but never getting closer. Her fuel gauge dropped from 3/4 to half tank in minutes. The truck was burning fuel at an impossible rate. Sarah tried to brake, tried to slow down, but the accelerator seemed to have a mind of its own. The speedometer climbed to 80, then 90. She was hurtling through the empty streets of Ashford at suicidal speed, unable to slow down, passing the same landmarks again and again. The diner, the theater, the gas station, the church. The diner, the theater, the gas station, the church. Repeating, cycling, trapped in a loop of Main Street that defied physics and geography. Sarah screamed, hands locked on the steering wheel, unable to do anything but hold the truck steady as it raced through the impossible town. Then she saw the people. They appeared suddenly, standing on the sidewalks, standing in the streets, standing in the yards of the houses. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all wearing clothing from 1952, all perfectly still, all facing her truck as it screamed past. All smiling the same smile, wide, fixed, inhuman. Sarah closed her eyes, unable to watch anymore, praying this was a nightmare she'd wake from. The truck jolted violently, throwing her against the seatbelt. She opened her eyes to see the road ahead, real road, dark desert, Interstate 84 stretching into the darkness. The town was gone. The people were gone. Her speedometer showed a normal 65 mph. Her fuel gauge read 3/4 full, as if she'd never burned through half a tank. The GPS blue dot was back on I-84, showing her exactly where she should be. Her satellite radio resumed playing mid-song as if it had never cut out. Her phone showed a signal again. Everything was normal. Sarah pulled onto the shoulder, hands shaking, heart pounding. She sat in the idling truck for 20 minutes, trying to convince herself it had been a hallucination brought on by fatigue. But she knew better. It had been real. The town had been real. Those smiling people had been real, whatever they were. Sarah eventually continued to Salt Lake City, delivered her cargo, then spent 3 days researching Ashford. She found nothing. No town by that name in Idaho. No records of any town being established in 1952 in that area. No historical references, no maps showing it, no mention anywhere. She asked other truckers who ran the I-84 route. Most had never heard of Ashford. But a few, always after looking around nervously to make sure others weren't listening, would lean in close and whisper that they'd seen it too. The town that shouldn't exist. The place that appears from nowhere, traps travelers in its endless loop, shows them the smiling inhabitants of a nightmare masquerading as small-town America. Sarah still drives trucks, but she changed her routes. She won't take any load that requires I-84 through southern Idaho. On the rare occasions when she has no choice, she drives that stretch during daylight, with every light in the truck turned on, radio blaring, phone in hand ready to call someone, anyone, if the GPS dot starts drifting off the mapped highway. She's heard that Ashford appears only at night, only to solo drivers, only when you're not expecting it. She's heard that some truckers who entered the town were never seen again. She's heard that the population number on the welcome sign increases by one every time someone doesn't make it back to the real world. In March 2023, exactly 2 years after her experience, Sarah was driving through Wyoming in daylight when her phone pinged with a strange message. No number, no sender, just a text. "Welcome to Ashford. Population 3,848. She deleted it immediately, but similar messages arrive every few months. The population number keeps increasing. Sarah doesn't know what Ashford really is. A ghost town that exists outside normal reality. A trap created by something inhuman. A glitch in the fabric of space where a town from 1952 is permanently frozen. She doesn't want to know. She just wants to forget the sight of those smiling people, the feeling of being trapped in that endless loop, the certainty that something was waiting for her to stop, to step out of the truck, to become one of them. The town that shouldn't exist is still out there, waiting in the darkness between Twin Falls and Malta, ready to appear in the headlights of the next unsuspecting traveler. And somewhere in the dark corners of trucker communities, the word spreads in whispers. If you're driving I-84 in southern Idaho at night and your GPS starts acting strange, don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't look at the people on the sidewalks. Just drive straight through and pray you make it back to the real world. Because in Ashford, the lights are always on, the streets are always clean, and the population is always growing. Story 3. The Voice in the Static. Daniel Rodriguez had driven tanker trucks for 19 years, hauling everything from gasoline to chemicals across the southwestern United States. He was a company man for Lone Star Transport, known for his perfect safety record and his willingness to take the routes other drivers avoided. The long, empty stretches through West Texas and New Mexico where services were sparse and the landscape was unforgiving. On November 17, 2020, Daniel left El Paso with a full load of diesel fuel bound for Albuquerque. The route along Interstate 10 and then north on I-25 was one he'd run hundreds of times. The weather forecast was clear. His truck had just passed inspection, and he expected an easy overnight haul. He departed at 11 p.m., planning to arrive at the Albuquerque depot by 7 a.m. The first indication that something was wrong came 30 miles outside of Las Cruces. Daniel's CB radio, which had been silent, suddenly erupted with a burst of static so loud it made him jump. He quickly turned down the volume, assuming it was atmospheric interference or a nearby trucker with a malfunctioning radio, but the static didn't fade. It continued at a lower volume, a constant hissing that filled the cab. Daniel tried changing channels. The static followed him to every frequency. He tried turning the CB completely off. The static continued, emanating from the speaker even though the unit showed no power. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He reached for the CB, intending to physically disconnect it when the static resolved into something else. A voice, faint at first, barely distinguishable from the background noise, but definitely a voice. Male, he thought, speaking in a rhythmic pattern that sounded almost like prayer or chanting. Daniel couldn't make out individual words, just the cadence and tone. The voice rose and fell, urgent and desperate, like someone calling for help. "Hello," Daniel called out. "This is Lone Star Transport Unit 74. Do you need assistance?" The voice continued its rhythmic chanting, ignoring him. Daniel tried again, using proper CB protocol, identifying himself clearly. The voice kept going, never pausing, never acknowledging him. Miles passed. The voice continued. Daniel's attempts to communicate went unanswered. He checked his phone, no signal, which wasn't unusual in this remote area. He tried his satellite phone, which should work anywhere. It powered on but couldn't establish a connection. The voice from the CB grew slightly louder, the chanting more distinct. Daniel started to pick out individual syllables, though they formed no language he recognized. Near the town of Truth or Consequences, Daniel pulled into a rest area, desperate for silence and clarity. The moment he turned off the engine, the voice stopped. Complete silence filled the cab. Daniel sat in the darkness, breathing deeply, trying to calm his racing heart. Maybe it had been interference. Maybe it was over. He stepped out to perform his mandatory inspection, checking the tanker's connections and tires with a flashlight. Everything was secure. The night air was cold and still, carrying no sound except the distant hum of sparse traffic on the interstate. Daniel finished his inspection and climbed back into the cab. The instant he turned the key, the voice returned. Not gradually building from static, but immediately at full volume, the chanting now loud and clear through the CB speaker. And this time, Daniel understood some of the words. 9 miles north, turn west, the old road 9 miles north. Daniel's hands trembled on the steering wheel. This was impossible. The CB was still showing as powered off. Yet the voice continued, crystal clear now, repeating its instructions. 9 miles north, turn west, the old road 9 miles north. He pulled back onto I-25, heading north as planned. He tried to ignore the voice, tried to focus on the road, but it was relentless. The same phrase over and over with increasing urgency. Daniel counted mile markers, 8 miles from the rest area, 9 miles. As he passed the 9-mile point, he saw it, a faded sign for an exit that didn't appear on any map, leading to Old Highway 85 West. The voice grew frantic. Turn west, the old road, turn west now. Daniel gripped the wheel and drove past the exit. He wasn't following instructions from a disembodied voice. He wasn't taking an unmapped exit into the New Mexico desert in the middle of the night with a full load of diesel fuel. The voice screamed. Not words anymore, just a raw, agonized scream that seemed to vibrate through the entire truck. Daniel slammed his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It was inside his head, inside his skull, boring into his brain. The scream went on and on, impossible for human lungs, impossible for any living thing. Blood started dripping from Daniel's nose. The pain in his head was excruciating, like something was trying to force its way inside his mind. His vision blurred. The truck drifted toward the shoulder. Daniel fought to maintain control, fought to stay conscious, fought against the overwhelming urge to turn around, take that exit, follow the voice's commands. Then it stopped. Complete silence. The absence of sound was almost as shocking as the scream had been. Daniel managed to pull onto the shoulder, gasping for air, wiping blood from his nose with his sleeve. He sat there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, listening. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of his truck's engine and the occasional vehicle passing on the interstate. Daniel continued north, shaken but relieved. Whatever that had been, it was over. Las Cruces was behind him, Albuquerque was ahead, and he just needed to complete this run and get home. He'd take a few days off, see a doctor about the nosebleed, maybe get his hearing checked. Normal problems with normal solutions. 30 miles later, the voice returned. Different now. Not chanting, not screaming. Pleading, please, 9 miles south, turn west, please, I've been waiting, please help me. The voice broke with emotion, sounding like a man on the verge of tears. My family, the crash, please, I can't find the road, please help me. Daniel's resolve wavered. This sounded like a genuine person in distress, not the inhuman chanting from before. Could someone have crashed on that old highway? Could they be using a CB radio to call for help, somehow reaching his unit? He checked his mirrors, considering turning back. Please, I've been here so long, can't find my way, the children are crying, please. The voice was desperate, broken, human. Daniel made his decision. He took the next exit, turned south, headed back toward that unmarked exit for Old Highway 85 West. He was a good man. He couldn't leave someone stranded if there was even a chance this was real. The exit appeared in his headlights. Daniel slowed, turning onto the crumbling pavement of what had once been a highway. The road was in terrible condition, barely 1 lane wide, chunks of asphalt missing, weeds growing through cracks. His headlights revealed nothing ahead but darkness and desert scrub. Thank you, continue west, you're almost here." The voice was eager now, excited. Daniel drove slowly, navigating the damaged road carefully. Half a mile in, his headlights caught something ahead. A vehicle. An old sedan overturned in the desert beside the road. Daniel's heart sank. There had been a crash, the voice had been real. He pulled to a stop, grabbed his flashlight and first aid kit. As he approached the overturned vehicle, details became clear. The car was old, decades old. A 1970s model, rusted and weathered. It had been here for years, not days. Desert plants grew around it. Sand had drifted against it. This wasn't a recent crash. "Inside, look inside, help us." The voice came from everywhere now, not just the truck's CB. It echoed across the desert, seemed to emanate from the overturned car itself. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but he approached anyway, directing his flashlight through the broken windows. Empty. No bodies, no blood, no sign anyone had been inside when it crashed. Just an old abandoned wreck. Daniel straightened up, heart pounding, realizing his terrible mistake. He turned back toward his truck. It was gone. The road was gone. He stood in open desert, nothing but darkness and scrub extending in all directions. His flashlight beam swept across the landscape, finding nothing. No truck, no road, no overturned car anymore, just emptiness. "Thank you for stopping, we've been so lonely, stay with us, stay forever." The voice came from all around him, multiple voices now, men, women, children, all speaking in unison. "Join us in the static, join us between the frequencies, join us where travelers come to stay." Daniel ran. He had no idea which direction, just away. His flashlight beam bobbed wildly as his boots pounded the desert hardpan. Behind him, the voices followed, calling, pleading, demanding. Shapes moved in his peripheral vision, figures that disappeared when he looked directly at them. The voices grew louder, closer, multiplying. His boot caught something and he fell hard, flashlight flying from his hand. He scrambled in the darkness, searching for it, his fingers finding the cool metal cylinder. He clicked it on the truck's headlights. He was lying on the pavement of Old Highway 85, 30 feet in front of his truck, which sat idling exactly where he'd left it. The driver's door was open. The CB was silent. Daniel crawled, then staggered to his truck, pulling himself into the cab. He slammed the door, locked it, threw the transmission into reverse. The truck lurched backward onto I-25. Daniel spun it around, heading north again, leaving that cursed exit behind. He drove at maximum speed, watching the mirrors, expecting to see figures pursuing him. The CB remained silent. His phone suddenly showed signal again. The satellite phone connected. Everything was normal, except Daniel's hands, which were covered in desert sand, and his boots, which were caked with dirt, and the 2 hours that had vanished from his life according to his watch. It was 4:47 a.m. The last time he'd checked before taking the exit, it had been 2:15 a.m. Daniel delivered his load to Albuquerque on time, told no one what happened, and put in for a transfer to daytime routes in different territories. His request was approved. He hasn't driven I-25 through that section of New Mexico since. He disconnected the CB radio in his new truck and refuses to install another one. But sometimes, late at night when he's trying to sleep, he hears the static. Faint, from no source he can identify, just barely audible. And in the static, voices calling. "Come back, turn west, the old road. We're waiting." He knows they'll always be waiting. Those things that hide in the static between frequencies, luring travelers off the mapped highways into places they can never leave. And he knows he came within minutes of joining them, of becoming another voice in the static, Another desperate call luring the next victim down Old Highway 85 west to the place where travelers check in but never check out. Story 4. The Shadow in the Mirror. Catherine Walsh had been a professional driver for 12 years, hauling refrigerated goods across the Pacific Northwest. She preferred the reefer runs despite the added responsibility of maintaining proper temperature for perishable cargo. The hum of the refrigeration unit was familiar company during long solo nights on the highway. On January 22, 2022, she picked up a load of frozen seafood from the docks in Seattle, bound for a distribution center in Spokane. She left Seattle at 10:30 p.m., taking Interstate 90 east through the Cascade Mountains. Winter weather in the passes could be treacherous, but the forecast was favorable, cold but clear, roads dry. Catherine had made this run countless times and felt confident in her abilities to handle whatever conditions arose. The first hour was routine, climbing through the foothills, passing the occasional snowplow staged for possible deployment. At the summit of Snoqualmie Pass, Catherine stopped at the truck parking area to check her refrigeration unit and perform a walk-around inspection. Everything looked good. Temperature holding steady at -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Tire chains accessible if conditions worsened. Fuel 3/4 full. She climbed back into the cab and adjusted her mirrors before pulling out. That's when she first saw it. In her driver's side mirror, behind and slightly to the left of the truck, stood a figure. Just a silhouette, humanoid but wrong somehow, proportions slightly off, too tall or too thin. Catherine immediately turned to look directly behind her truck. Nothing there. She looked back at the mirror. The figure remained perfectly still, clearly visible in the reflection despite being invisible when she looked at the actual location. Catherine felt her skin prickle. She'd heard other truckers talk about the mirror man phenomenon, glimpses of figures that appear in mirrors but not in reality, usually explained away as fatigue-induced hallucinations. She'd always dismissed such stories as highway legends. Now she wasn't so sure. She stared at the mirror. The figure didn't move. She pulled out of the parking area, accelerating down the eastern slope of the pass. She kept glancing at the driver's mirror. The figure was gone. Catherine exhaled shakily, attributing it to exhaustion or tricks of light and shadow. But 5 miles down the road, she checked the mirror again and the figure was back. Same position, same impossible presence, keeping perfect pace with her truck despite appearing to be standing still. Catherine tried the passenger mirror. Clear. Rearview mirror mounted inside the cab. Clear. Only the driver's side exterior mirror showed the figure standing there in the reflection, a shadow that defied explanation. She tried ignoring it, focusing on the road ahead, but her eyes kept being drawn back to that mirror. The figure never moved, never changed position, just maintained its impossible presence behind and beside her truck. Near Clee Alum, Catherine pulled into a rest area, needing to confirm her sanity. She grabbed her flashlight and walked around the truck, shining the beam into every shadow, every corner, every space where someone might hide. Nothing. No footprints in the thin snow, no sign of any living person. She stood by the driver's door and looked at the mirror from outside the truck. The figure was there, reflected in the mirror, appearing to stand just a few feet from where Catherine actually stood. But when she turned to look at that location, she saw only empty parking lot and her own truck. She waved her hand through the space where the figure should be. Nothing. She looked back at the mirror. The figure remained, and now it had turned its head. It was looking at her reflection. Catherine's heart hammered. She climbed back into the truck, locked all the doors, and sat there trying to calm her breathing. This was impossible. Mirrors showed reflections of real objects and light. They didn't create images from nothing. There had to be an explanation, condensation on the mirror creating a pattern that looked like a human figure perhaps, or damage to the glass causing distortion. She pulled out a bottle of glass cleaner and a rag, then stepped back outside. She thoroughly cleaned the driver's side mirror, removing every speck of dirt and moisture. The mirror gleamed. She checked her work in the reflection. The figure was still there, now closer. It appeared to be standing directly beside her, though the space beside her was empty. And as Catherine watched in horror, the figure in the mirror raised its hand and placed it on her reflection's shoulder. Catherine felt pressure on her shoulder. Not imagined, not hallucinated, actual physical pressure, as if an invisible hand was gripping her. She spun around, swinging her flashlight like a weapon. Nothing. But the pressure remained, fingers digging into her shoulder with uncomfortable force. She looked at the mirror again. The figure's hand was on her reflection's shoulder, and as she watched, it began pulling her reflection backward, away from the truck, toward the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. Catherine ran. She dove into her truck, slammed the door, started the engine, and peeled out of the rest area at reckless speed. The pressure on her shoulder vanished the moment she started moving. She checked the mirror. The figure was back in its original position, behind and to the left, maintaining perfect relative position as she drove. She grabbed her CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, any eastbound drivers on 90, this is Frost Queen, anyone out there?" A response came back immediately, a male voice. "This is Big Rig Bobby, eastbound near Ellensburg. I've got you, Frost Queen. What's your 20? Catherine almost cried with relief at hearing another human voice. "I'm just past Clea Lum, experiencing some. I think I need to report something strange." "Go ahead, Frost Queen." Catherine took a breath. "This is going to sound crazy, but there's something in my driver's mirror, a figure. It's not actually there, but I can see it in the reflection. It's been following me since Snoqualmie Pass." Silence on the radio. Then, "Frost Queen, I need you to listen carefully. Do not look at that mirror again. Do not stop your truck. Get to Spokane as fast as safely possible. Do you understand?" Catherine's blood turned cold. "You know what this is?" Another pause. "I've heard stories, never seen it myself, but drivers talk. They say it starts with a shadow in the mirror. If you stop, it gets closer. If you interact with it, acknowledge it, it becomes more real. I knew a guy who said he fought it off. I also knew a guy whose truck was found abandoned with all his mirrors shattered from the inside. Get to Spokane. Don't stop. Don't look." Catherine thanked him and signed off. She adjusted the mirror, angling it away so she couldn't see the figure without making a deliberate effort. She focused on the road, on maintaining speed, on the miles counting down toward Spokane. The refrigeration unit hummed its familiar rhythm. The road was clear and dry. Everything was normal except for the thing in her mirror, but she felt it watching. A prickle on the back of her neck, a certainty that something was observing her, studying her, waiting for any sign of weakness or fear. Her shoulder ached where it had gripped her. Catherine turned on the radio, found a loud rock station, tried to drown out her thoughts with music. At the town of Moses Lake, she needed fuel. Her tank was approaching a quarter full, and she couldn't make it to Spokane without refueling. Catherine took the exit with dread, pulling into a large truck stop with bright lights and dozens of other vehicles. Safety in numbers, she hoped. She parked at the pump farthest from any buildings, giving herself maximum visibility in all directions. She started the fuel pump and walked around to the driver's side. She couldn't avoid seeing the mirror. The figure was closer now, appearing to stand directly beside her truck's driver's door, and it had changed. No longer just a silhouette, she could make out details. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Its head was too large, elongated, featureless except for two dark hollows where eyes should be. As Catherine watched, frozen in fear, the figure in the mirror reached for the truck's door handle. The actual door handle moved. Catherine heard the latch click. The door began to open. She hadn't unlocked it. It should be impossible, but the door swung open, manipulated by something that existed only in reflections. Catherine ran to the truck stop building, slamming through the door into the bright fluorescent interior. A handful of truckers sat at tables drinking coffee. A clerk stood behind the counter. Everyone looked up at her dramatic entrance. "My truck," Catherine gasped. "Someone at my truck." The door opened. Two truckers immediately stood and walked outside with her. They approached her truck carefully. The driver's door was closed and locked, no sign of tampering. "Are you okay, miss?" one of the truckers asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Catherine shook her head, not trusting herself to explain. She thanked them, finished fueling, and climbed back into her cab. She deliberately didn't look at the mirror. The final 90 miles to Spokane were the longest of Catherine's life. She drove exactly at the speed limit, hands locked on the wheel, eyes forward, refusing to glance at the mirror even once. But she felt the presence intensifying. The temperature in the cab seemed to drop despite the heater running full blast. Frost formed on the inside of the windows, impossible given the heater output. Catherine's breath fogged in the air. Something touched the back of her neck, icy fingers trailing down her spine. Catherine screamed but kept driving. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't look. She wouldn't give it what it wanted. The touches continued, her arms, her shoulders, her face. Always cold, always wrong, feeling like something that had never been alive reaching through from somewhere else. The lights of Spokane appeared ahead. As Catherine entered the city limits, the touches stopped. The cold vanished. The cab temperature returned to normal. She risked a glance at the driver's mirror. Empty. Just the reflection of the road behind her, normal traffic, city lights. The figure was gone. Catherine delivered her load, then drove directly to a dealership and traded her truck for a different unit. She paid out of pocket for the exchange, unwilling to keep the vehicle even one more day. She told the dealer the refrigeration unit was making strange noises, a lie to avoid explaining the truth. The dealer accepted without question. In the months after, Catherine researched the phenomenon. She found scattered references in trucker forums and urban legend databases. The shadow in the mirror. The reflection that becomes real. Theories ranged from ghosts of drivers killed in accidents to interdimensional entities that use mirrors as gateways to something that existed before mirrors were invented, something that sees reflections as portals. Catherine still drives trucks, but she's made modifications. She uses smaller convex mirrors that don't show enough detail to reveal figures. She covers her mirrors with cloth whenever she stops. She refuses runs through the Cascades at night. And she never, ever looks too long at any reflective surface, because she learned that some things exist in the space between reality and reflection. And if you acknowledge them, if you interact with them, they become more real. She sometimes wonders about her old truck, whether the next driver sees a figure in the mirror, whether the shadow claimed a victim or simply moved on to stalk someone else. She wonders what would have happened if she'd stopped during that final stretch to Spokane, if she'd let the thing touch her long enough to complete whatever process it had begun. Mostly, she's grateful she'll never find out. But she carries a hammer in her truck now, and if she ever sees that shadow again in any mirror, she knows what she'll do. She'll shatter the glass immediately, destroying the portal before it opens completely, before the thing that lives in reflections can step through into the real world. Because Catherine Walsh learned the most important lesson a truck driver can know. Some rules of reality have exceptions, and some of those exceptions are hunting us. Story 5. The cargo that breathed. James Mitchell had 26 years of experience hauling specialized cargo across North America. He worked for a company that handled sensitive shipments requiring discretion, medical specimens, research materials, occasionally items for private collectors who valued privacy over cost. James asked few questions and kept his mouth shut, which made him valuable. On August 9, 2021, he received a job offer that paid triple his normal rate for a simple overnight run from a private warehouse in rural Pennsylvania to a facility in upstate New York. The dispatcher who contacted him was brief. Pick up 1 shipping container. Climate controlled, do not open under any circumstances. Deliver to the specified address before 6 a.m. Payment on completion. James agreed immediately. Triple rate for a 4-hour drive was too good to refuse, regardless of the mysterious nature. He'd hauled stranger things before without incident. He arrived at the Pennsylvania warehouse at 11 p.m. The building was unmarked, sitting alone on a dirt road deep in the forest. A crew was waiting with a forklift, loading a standard 40-foot shipping container onto his flatbed. The container was sealed with heavy locks and equipped with its own climate control unit, already running and maintaining some specific internal temperature. James secured the container properly, checked all connections, and signed the paperwork without reading the details. As he climbed into his cab, one of the workers approached his window. The man looked nervous, glancing back at the container. "Drive steady," he said. "No sudden stops or sharp turns. And if you hear anything from back there, don't worry about it. The cargo sometimes makes noise. Just keep driving and don't open the container, under any circumstances. Clear?" James nodded, though unease settled in his stomach. What kind of cargo made noise? He pulled out onto the rural highway, heading north toward the New York border. The first hour was uneventful. The container was properly secured, the climate control unit humming along, maintaining whatever temperature was required. James tried the radio and found a station playing classic rock. He settled in for what should be an easy run. Near the town of Wellsboro, he heard it, a sound from the container behind him. At first, he thought it was just the climate control system adjusting, mechanical sounds being transmitted through the trailer. But then it came again, a distinct thump, as if something inside the container had struck the interior wall. James checked his mirrors. The container looked secure. Another thump, harder this time. Then another, a rhythm developing. Thump, 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 pause, thump, thump, thump. Too regular to be mechanical, too forceful to be anything but deliberate. Something inside that container was hitting the walls. The worker's words echoed in James's memory. The cargo sometimes makes noise. What kind of cargo? Animals being transported for a zoo or research facility. That would explain the climate control and the noise. James tried to convince himself it was that simple, though the triple rate and secretive pickup suggested otherwise. The thumping continued, growing more frequent. James pulled over to check the container's security. Everything was locked tight, the climate control showing green indicators, the temperature holding steady at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. As James walked along the container's length, the thumping followed him, moving to match his position. Whatever was inside was tracking his movement. James returned to his cab and continued driving. He considered calling the dispatcher, but the instructions had been explicit. Deliver the container, no questions, no stops. He was being paid for his discretion as much as his driving skills. The thumping gradually subsided, and James convinced himself the worst was over. Then he heard the breathing. Low and deep, a rhythmic respiration that resonated through the trailer connection into his cab. Breath in, pause, breath out. The unmistakable sound of something alive and large drawing air. The climate control couldn't make that sound. No mechanical system could. James's hands tightened on the wheel. The container held something living, something that required 55-degree temperature, something big enough to make the entire container resonate with its breathing. His mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. What private collectors wanted living cargo delivered in secret at night? What required that specific temperature and complete discretion? The breathing grew louder, faster, as if whatever was inside had detected his awareness. James heard other sounds now, scraping, as if something with claws or rough surfaces was dragging along the container's interior. The scraping grew more frantic, creating patterns on the metal walls. Back and forth, like something pacing in an enclosure too small for it. Near Elmira, James made a decision. He needed to know what he was hauling. The container's locks were heavy-duty, requiring special tools, but James carried bolt cutters in his truck for emergencies. He pulled onto a dark side road, stopped in a clearing surrounded by forest, and grabbed his flashlight and bolt cutters. The moment his engine shut off, everything inside the container went silent. No breathing, no scraping, no thumping. Complete silence. James stood by his truck listening. The forest around him was equally silent. No insects, no birds, no rustling of small animals. Just dead quiet, as if every living thing had fled the area. James approached the container slowly. In the beam of his flashlight, he could see that the container's metal walls had changed, distorted. The surface showed bulges pushing outward from inside, as if immense pressure had been applied. Some of the bulges were shaped disturbingly like hands, too large to be human, with too many fingers but recognizably hand-like. The metal was stretched thin in places, looking ready to tear. James raised the bolt cutters to the first lock. As the blades touched the metal, the breathing resumed inside the container, suddenly, explosively loud, like a whale surfacing. James jumped back. The container began rocking on the trailer, swaying with enough force to make the entire truck sway with it. Something inside was throwing itself against the walls. The climate control unit sparked, flickered, and died. The temperature readout went dark. Inside the container, whatever had been kept at 55 degrees was now experiencing summer heat, and it was angry. The metal walls boomed with impacts. The bulges grew larger, sharper, as if something was trying to punch through. James ran to his cab, started the engine, and accelerated back onto the highway. He had to deliver this container immediately, get it to the facility where whoever ordered it could deal with whatever was inside. He couldn't handle this. He wasn't equipped for this. He was just a driver. The container behind him shrieked. Not a mechanical sound, not an animal sound, but something in between. A vocalization that carried rage and hunger and something almost like words. James pushed the accelerator down, reaching dangerous speeds on the rural highway. He had to get this thing delivered before it broke free. The climate control unit came back online, the readout showing 55 degrees again. The moment it resumed, the chaos from inside the container stopped. Immediate silence, complete calm. As if the temperature was more than just climate control, it was sedation. Whatever was in there needed the cold to stay dormant. Letting it warm up had wakened something that should remain asleep. James reached the delivery address at 4:30 a.m., 90 minutes early. The facility was another unmarked building, this one surrounded by high fences with security cameras every 20 feet. Armed guards met him at the gate, checked his credentials, and directed him to a loading bay surrounded by emergency equipment, fire suppression systems, heavy doors, containment barriers. A woman in a lab coat approached as James backed his truck into the bay. "Any problems with the cargo?" she asked. James hesitated, then nodded. The climate control cut out for about 2 minutes. Whatever S in there woke up. The woman's face went pale. "It breached dormancy. Did you open the container?" James shook his head. "I thought about it but didn't." The woman sagged with relief. "Thank God, if you'd opened it." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. James could imagine what would have happened. The loading bay doors closed behind his truck, sealing them inside. Additional personnel in hazmat suits appeared, surrounding the container with equipment James didn't recognize. The woman handed him an envelope. "Your payment plus a bonus for maintaining protocol. Forget this delivery. Forget what you heard. Sign the NDA we're about to give you, take your money, and never speak of this again." James signed the NDA without reading it, took his payment, and left. The amount in the envelope was 5 times the agreed rate. Enough money to suggest they were very grateful he hadn't opened that container. As he drove away from the facility, he saw through his mirrors that they were using some kind of specialized equipment to cool the container even further before opening it, surrounding it with vapor that looked like liquid nitrogen fog. James never found out what was in that container. He never wanted to know. He quit the specialized cargo business and took a job with a standard freight company, hauling normal loads of normal goods. He tells other drivers to be careful about high-paying, mysterious jobs, to ask more questions before accepting, to value their safety over any amount of money. But sometimes, late at night when he's trying to sleep, he hears it, that deep, resonant breathing, the sound of something massive and wrong drawing air in an enclosed space. And he wonders if he really heard it only during that one delivery, or if some sounds echo in your mind forever once you've heard them. He wonders what would have happened if he'd cut those locks, opened that container, come face to face with whatever was inside. He's grateful he'll never know, but the curiosity never completely fades. What requires 55-degree temperature to stay dormant? What has hands with too many fingers and a voice that sounds almost like words? What private collectors or research facilities deal in living cargo so dangerous that its mere waking requires hazmat teams and containment protocols? James doesn't have answers, and he's learned that some questions are better left unasked. Some cargo is better left sealed. Some sounds are better left unheard. And some deliveries pay triple rate because they're asking you to flirt with something that shouldn't exist, to transport something that was never meant to travel on public highways, to play a small part in operations that exist in the shadows of the normal world. The breathing stays with him, always in the back of his mind. A reminder that the containers traveling on America's highways don't all contain consumer goods or industrial materials. Some hold things that were found when they should have stayed lost. Things that breathe and wait and hunger for the moment when the climate control fails and the cold sleep ends and the locks break, and they can finally emerge into a world that has forgotten how to defend against them. James Mitchell drove that cargo safely to its destination. He maintained protocol. He kept his mouth shut. And he'll never know if his restraint that night, his decision not to cut those locks when the container fell silent, saved only his own life, or prevented something far worse from breaking free into the Pennsylvania darkness. Story 6. The rest stopped that MOVED. Patricia Donovan had been driving long haul for 8 years, specializing in overnight cross-country runs that paid premium rates for drivers willing to handle the isolation and exhaustion. She was a careful planner, mapping her routes to include strategic rest stops where she could take her mandatory breaks and catch brief sleep. On June 4, 2020, she departed from Atlanta with a load of electronics bound for Phoenix, planning a 3-day journey with specific stops marked on her route map. The first day was uneventful. Patricia made her scheduled stops, maintained her logs, and crossed into Texas as the sun set on her second evening. She was running along Interstate 20 west of Fort Worth, looking for a specific rest area she'd used many times before, a well-maintained facility with clean restrooms and adequate parking, located near the town of Eastland. According to her GPS and the mile markers, she was approaching the rest area's location. Patricia had stopped there at least 20 times over the years. She knew it should appear on the right side of the highway, marked by a blue service sign 1 mile in advance. The sign appeared on schedule. Patricia signaled and prepared to take the exit. The rest area looked different. Not subtly different, completely different. Instead of the modern brick building she remembered, there was an older structure made of limestone blocks with a tin roof. Instead of multiple parking lanes with designated truck spaces, there was a small gravel lot with room for maybe 6 vehicles. Instead of bright LED lights, there were a few dim incandescent bulbs on poles. Patricia hesitated, wondering if she'd somehow taken the wrong exit, but the signage clearly identified this as the Eastland Rest Area. Perhaps they demolished and rebuilt it since her last visit 3 months ago, though that seemed unlikely given the ancient appearance of the building. She needed to use the restroom and stretch her legs, so she pulled into the lot. Only one other vehicle was present, an older pickup truck that looked like it dated from the 1970s, rusted and weathered. Patricia parked, shut down her engine, and stepped out into the warm Texas night. The air felt wrong somehow, too still, too quiet. No highway noise despite Interstate 20 being less than 100 feet away. No insect sounds, no breeze, just oppressive silence. The restroom building was unlocked. Patricia pushed open the heavy wooden door and found herself in a space that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1960s. Old tile floors, metal stall doors with gaps showing heavy wear, ancient sinks with separate hot and cold taps. But everything was clean, recently maintained. The place was just old, not neglected. Patricia used the facilities quickly, feeling increasingly uneasy. The lighting flickered occasionally. The mirror above the sink showed her reflection clearly but seemed to have some distortion, making her face look slightly wrong, angles not quite right, proportions subtly off. She left the restroom and returned to her truck, deciding to skip stretching and just get back on the highway. As she reached her driver's door, she noticed the pickup truck was gone. It had been there 60 seconds ago when she entered the building. Now the lot was empty except for her truck. Patricia scanned the area. No sign of the pickup pulling out, no sound of an engine, no tire tracks in the gravel. It had simply vanished. Patricia climbed into her cab and started the engine. She pulled out of the lot, turning back toward the highway. But the entrance ramp wasn't where it should be. Instead of the short acceleration lane merging back onto I-20, Patricia found herself on a narrow 2-lane road heading west through open rangeland. No highway in sight, no signs, just empty road disappearing into darkness. Her GPS showed her location as still at the rest area, the blue dot frozen in place despite her truck moving. Patricia stopped, pulled out her atlas, tried to orient herself. According to her maps, there shouldn't be any road in this direction, just the rest area and the interstate. Yet here she was on a road that didn't exist. She continued driving, reasoning that any westward road would eventually intersect another highway or lead to a town. After 10 miles, she saw lights ahead, the familiar glow of a service area. The blue rest area sign appeared. Eastland Rest Area 1 mile. Patricia felt relief. She must have gotten confused in the dark, taken a service road or something. She reached the rest area from a different direction. She took the exit. The rest area that appeared was the old limestone building with the gravel lot, the exact same place she just left. Patricia checked her odometer. She'd driven 10 miles. She checked her GPS, still showing her at the rest area as if she'd never moved. Her fuel gauge showed she'd burned gas. Time had passed. But somehow she'd driven in a circle back to this same impossible location. Patricia felt panic rising. She didn't take the exit this time. She drove past, continuing on the narrow road, determined to reach somewhere real, somewhere that made sense. The road went on, unchanging through landscape that all looked identical. After another 10 miles, the blue sign appeared again. Eastland Rest Area 1 mile. She passed it, kept driving. 10 miles later, the sign again. Patricia was trapped in a loop, a circuit that returned her to the same rest area no matter how far she drove or which direction she went. The odometer confirmed she was moving. The fuel gauge showed she was burning gas, but she couldn't escape this stretch of road. The fourth time she passed the rest area, Patricia saw vehicles in the lot. Multiple vehicles, trucks, cars, even an old bus. She pulled in, desperate for human contact, for someone who could explain what was happening. She parked and approached the nearest truck, a big rig similar to her own. The driver's door was open. Patricia called out, "Hello, I need help." No answer. She looked into the cab, empty. She checked the other vehicles, all empty, all unlocked, all looking like they'd been recently parked, keys still in ignitions, personal belongings on seats, but no drivers, no people. Just abandoned vehicles in various states of repair and age, some looking decades old, others nearly new. Patricia walked to the restroom building. The door was now locked. She peered through the small windows. Inside, the lights were off, but she could see shapes moving in the darkness. Multiple figures, indistinct, shifting and flowing like liquid shadow. They seemed to notice her attention, turning toward the window, pressing against the glass from inside. She ran back to her truck, started it, and peeled out of the lot. She didn't try to find the road anymore. She just drove straight west across the open rangeland, bouncing over rough ground, scraping through brush, desperate to break free of this impossible loop. Her truck wasn't built for off-road driving, but she pushed it anyway, maintaining speed, watching her odometer count upward. After 5 miles of overland driving, her headlights illuminated pavement. Not the narrow 2-lane from before, but proper interstate highway. Patricia angled toward it, her truck bouncing up an embankment and onto the shoulder. She merged into the right lane, checking for traffic. The highway was empty but looked normal, proper markings, reflective signs, mile markers. Mile marker 343. Patricia checked her atlas. That was right. She should be near mile marker 343 on I-20 west of Fort Worth. Her GPS suddenly flickered and updated, showing her back on course, moving westward normally. Her phone showed signal again. Everything was working. She drove for 30 minutes without stopping, putting as much distance as possible between herself and that rest area. At a well-lit truck stop in Abilene, she pulled in and shakily got coffee. Inside, she asked other truckers if they knew about the Eastland rest area. Most shook their heads. One older driver leaned close and said quietly, "You went to the old rest area, didn't you?" Patricia nodded. The driver sighed. "They closed that place in 1987, tore it down in 1989. Built the new one a mile east, but some people still find the old one. They say it moves around, shows up on the GPS like it's still there. Most people who stop there don't realize anything's wrong. They use the facilities and leave. But a few people, maybe 1 in 100, they get stuck. They drive in circles trying to leave. Some make it out, some don't." "What about the vehicles in the lot?" Patricia asked. "All those abandoned trucks and cars." The driver's face darkened. "Those are the ones who didn't make it out. Their trucks stay in that lot forever. The drivers," he shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe they're still there somehow. Maybe they're part of the rest area now, whatever it really is." Patricia finished her coffee and left. She continued to Phoenix, delivered her load, and immediately booked a return route that avoided that section of I-20 entirely. She researched the Eastland rest area and found conflicting information. Official records showed it had been relocated and rebuilt in 1989, but some older maps still showed the original location. And scattered across trucker forums were stories like hers, people finding an old rest area that shouldn't exist, people driving in loops, people seeing abandoned vehicles. She found one particularly disturbing thread from 2015. A trucker had posted asking if anyone had seen his father, who had disappeared while driving through West Texas. The father's truck had been equipped with GPS tracking, and the last recorded location was the old Eastland rest area. When family members went to look, they found nothing. No rest area, no facility, no sign that anything existed at that location. The son wrote that the GPS had continued showing his father's truck at that location for 3 weeks after he disappeared. Then the signal vanished completely. Patricia saved that thread. She printed it and kept it in her truck as a reminder of how close she'd come to joining the vehicles in that lot. She'd broken free by driving overland, by refusing to follow the loop, by forcing her way back to reality through sheer determination. But she knows others haven't been so fortunate. She wonders sometimes what would have happened if she'd stayed longer, if she'd investigated the restroom building more thoroughly, if she'd examined all those abandoned vehicles. Would she have found the missing drivers? Would she have learned the truth about what the rest area really is? A trap, a ghost of a demolished building that somehow persists, a glitch in reality that captures travelers. Patricia doesn't know, and she's not interested in finding out. She plans her routes carefully now, double-checking that any rest stop she intends to use actually appears on recent satellite imagery, actually shows up on multiple independent mapping services, actually exists in the current year and not just in old records. Because she learned that some places refuse to stay demolished. Some locations persist beyond their physical destruction, becoming something else, something that exists in the spaces between maps and memory. The old Eastland rest area is still out there somewhere, appearing on GPS units, luring drivers off the highway, collecting vehicles in its gravel lot. Patricia escaped, but she'll never know if she truly escaped completely or if part of her is still driving in those loops, still searching for the entrance ramp back to I-20, still trapped in the rest stop that refuses to die. Some nights when she's between sleeping and waking, she sees the blue sign, Eastland Rest Area 1 mile, and she drives past, always drives past, knowing that if she stops even once more, she'll never leave again. Story 7. The passenger who wasn't there. Raymond Foster had been driving for Midwest Transit Lines for 17 years, primarily running passenger bus routes between smaller cities that the major carriers didn't serve. He knew his regular riders by name, knew their routines, took pride in providing reliable service to communities that depended on his schedule. On February 18, 2023, Raymond was running his usual Friday night route from Springfield, Missouri to Tulsa, Oklahoma, a 3-hour journey that typically carried between 8 and 15 passengers. He departed Springfield at 10 p.m. with 11 passengers aboard. Raymond counted them as they boarded, verified their tickets, helped an elderly woman with her luggage. All routine, all normal. The bus pulled out of the station on schedule, following Highway 60 west through the darkness. Most passengers settled in to sleep or read. The cabin lights were dimmed. Everything was exactly as it should be. 20 minutes into the journey, Raymond glanced in his wide-angle mirror that showed the entire passenger cabin. 12 people. He counted again. Definitely 12. But he'd only taken 11 tickets. Raymond frowned, wondering if he'd miscounted during boarding. He made a mental note to recount at the next scheduled stop in Monett. He focused on driving, handling the curves of Highway 60 with practiced ease. Another glance in the mirror 10 minutes later showed 12 passengers again. This time Raymond studied them more carefully, trying to identify who the 12th person was. Most were sleeping. 3 were reading with small lights. 1 was looking out the window. All accounted for as regular passengers except. There was someone sitting in the back row, right-hand corner seat. Raymond didn't remember anyone boarding with a ticket for that seat. The figure sat perfectly still, face angled away toward the window, features indistinct in the low light. Raymond's unease grew. He'd been driving buses for nearly 2 decades. He always knew exactly how many passengers he carried. He didn't make counting mistakes. At Monett, 3 passengers disembarked. Raymond stood at the door, counting carefully as people exited. 3 off, none boarding. That meant 8 passengers remaining. He walked down the aisle doing a physical count with his flashlight. 9 people, including the figure in the back corner who hadn't moved during the stop. Raymond approached the back row. "Excuse me, I need to verify your ticket." No response. The figure remained motionless, face turned to the window. Raymond reached out to tap the passenger's shoulder, and his hand passed through empty air. He was touching the seat back. No person. But when he looked with his eyes, the figure was clearly there, solid and present. Raymond jerked his hand back, heart pounding. He closed his eyes, took a breath, opened them again. The figure was gone. The seat was empty. Just his eyes playing tricks in the low light, creating patterns that looked like a person. That had to be it. Raymond returned to the driver's seat, forcing his breathing to calm. Fatigue and shadows had created an illusion, nothing more. He pulled back onto the highway and continued toward the Oklahoma border. In his mirror, the figure was back, sitting in the same seat, same position, same stillness. Raymond gripped the steering wheel tighter. This was impossible. He just confirmed that seat was empty. But the mirror clearly showed someone sitting there. Raymond tried focusing on the road, ignoring the mirror, but his eyes kept being drawn back to it. The figure never moved, never shifted position, never turned its head or adjusted its posture. It just sat, facing the window, impossibly still. And gradually, Raymond realized something else. None of the other passengers seemed to notice it. Nobody looked at the back corner. Nobody reacted to the presence of an extra person. At the town of Fairland, 2 more passengers got off, 6 remaining. Raymond counted in the mirror. 7. The figure in the back hadn't moved. Raymond made a decision. He had to know if this was real or if he was having some kind of breakdown. He stood up and walked down the aisle while the bus was stopped, flashlight in hand. The back corner seat was empty. Raymond stood directly in front of it, shining his light on the worn fabric. No person, no luggage, nothing. He walked back to the driver's seat. In the mirror, the figure had returned. Same position, same seat. And now, for the first time, it turned its head. Slowly, deliberately, it looked directly at Raymond's reflection in the mirror. Raymond saw its face, or rather the absence of face. Where features should be, there was nothing, smooth and blank like a mannequin that had never been painted. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just empty surface where a face should exist. The figure continued staring at Raymond's reflection, its featureless face somehow conveying awareness and intent. Raymond tore his gaze away and started driving. His hands shook on the wheel. His mind raced through explanations. Was he having a stroke, carbon monoxide leak, some kind of psychological breakdown? But the passengers were breathing the same air and they seemed fine. This was something else, something wrong with reality itself. He grabbed his CB radio, hoping to reach another driver, anyone who could confirm he wasn't insane. Static. His cell phone showed no signal, which was odd because this stretch usually had coverage. The bus's radio wouldn't power on. He was isolated, cut off, alone with 8 passengers and one impossible extra presence. The figure stood up. Raymond saw it in the mirror, rising from the back corner seat with unnatural smoothness, no visible effort or weight shift. It stood perfectly upright, too tall for the bus ceiling, yet somehow not bending or crouching. It simply existed in a space too small for it, defying physical dimensions. It began walking forward down the aisle. Not toward Raymond, toward one of the sleeping passengers, a middle-aged man in a business suit who had boarded in Springfield. The figure moved with wrong fluidity, gliding more than walking. It stopped beside the sleeping man's seat and reached down with a hand that had too many fingers. Raymond slammed on the brakes, throwing everyone forward against their seatbelts. Passengers jolted awake, confused and alarmed. "Sorry," Raymond called out. "Thought I saw something in the road." He looked in the mirror. The figure was back in the corner seat, motionless as before. The businessman rubbed his neck, looking disoriented and disturbed. Raymond continued driving, but now he watched the businessman carefully. The man seemed wrong somehow. His movements were slightly off, his expression blank and distant. After 10 minutes, the man stood and walked toward the front of the bus. "I need to get off," he said to Raymond. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Let me off here." "Sir, we're on the highway." "The next stop is Tulsa in 40 minutes. The man grabbed Raymond's shoulder. His grip was ice cold, pressure building painfully. "Let me off now." Raymond saw something wrong with the man's eyes. They reflected light strangely, like animal eyes caught in headlights. He pulled onto the shoulder. "Okay, okay." The man walked to the door. Raymond opened it. The man stepped down onto the dark roadside and walked directly into the forest without looking back, without hesitation, disappearing into the trees. Raymond closed the door, his stomach churning with dread. Something had happened to that passenger, something connected to the figure. He counted in the mirror. 7 people, plus the figure in the back. 8 total, but only 7 should remain. No, 6 should remain after the businessman got off. Raymond's head swam with confusion. The numbers weren't working. Reality wasn't working. The figure stood again. This time it walked toward a young woman sleeping across the aisle. Raymond accelerated, swerving the bus slightly, trying to wake passengers, trying to disrupt whatever was happening. The woman's eyes opened. She looked around, confused, then fixed her gaze on something Raymond couldn't see. She screamed. Everyone woke at once. The woman kept screaming, pointing at empty air beside her seat. "It's touching me. Get it off. Something's touching me." Other passengers tried to calm her, but she fought them, clawing at her own arms as if trying to remove invisible hands. Raymond pulled over again. The woman bolted for the door the moment it opened, running into the darkness alongside the highway. 5 passengers remained. In the mirror, the figure had returned to the back corner. It turned its blank face toward Raymond again, and though it had no features, Raymond felt it communicating somehow. A message pressed directly into his mind. Not enough yet, need more, keep driving. Raymond understood with horrifying clarity. The figure was feeding on the passengers, taking something from them, their sense of self, their reality, their existence. It needed Raymond to keep driving, keep delivering victims, keep serving as its chauffeur through the night. And it would work its way through every passenger until only Raymond remained. "Everyone off the bus," Raymond announced, standing up. "Emergency situation. I need everyone to exit immediately." The remaining passengers protested, confused. "There's a problem with the bus," Raymond insisted. "You need to get off now. Call for another transport. I can't continue this route." Reluctantly, the passengers gathered their belongings and exited onto the roadside. Raymond gave them the company's emergency number, apologized profusely, promised they'd be taken care of. Once they were all outside, he looked in the mirror. The figure remained in the back corner, just it and Raymond now. "What do you want?" Raymond demanded. No answer. The figure stood and began walking forward. Raymond threw the bus into gear and accelerated, leaving the passengers behind on the roadside with their phones and their confusion. He had to get this thing away from innocent people, had to deal with it alone. The figure glided up the aisle, approaching the driver's seat. Raymond pushed the bus to maximum speed, careening down Highway 60 at reckless velocity. The figure reached the front and stood directly behind Raymond's seat. He felt its presence, cold and wrong, a void in reality standing inches behind him. Raymond cranked the wheel hard, sending the bus off the road into an empty field. He bailated out the door while the bus was still moving, rolling across grass and dirt, watching as the bus crashed through a fence and slammed into a tree. The bus crumpled, windows shattering, metal screaming. Raymond lay on the ground, breathing hard, watching the wrecked bus. Nothing moved inside. No figure emerged. Gradually, his CB radio crackled to life with voices asking about his status. His phone showed signal again. Reality had snapped back into place. The police and company investigators found Raymond sitting by the roadside, incoherent and traumatized. The passengers he'd left behind confirmed his story about an emergency stop, though they couldn't explain what the emergency had been. The wrecked bus showed no signs of any additional presence, just an empty passenger cabin and a driver's seat. Raymond was suspended pending psychological evaluation. The evaluations found him stressed but sane. He was eventually cleared to return to work but refused. He quit the next day. He couldn't risk encountering the figure again, couldn't risk carrying it to more victims, couldn't bear the memory of passengers walking into darkness with something else riding inside them. He researched other drivers and found scattered stories. Bus drivers, truck drivers who'd picked up hitchhikers, anyone who carried passengers at night. Accounts of extra people who shouldn't be there, of reflections that didn't match reality, of passengers who changed after sitting near something invisible. The stories were always dismissed as fatigue or mental breaks, but Raymond knew better. The passenger who wasn't there is still out there, boarding buses and trucks and cars, sitting in that back corner waiting. And when the count is wrong, when you see one extra passenger in your mirror, when someone walks off your vehicle and into the darkness, you'll know. The passenger has boarded, and it's feeding. And there's nothing you can do except get everyone off and crash your vehicle and hope you survive, because some passengers don't need a ticket. They just need you to keep driving. Story 8. The Road That Went Backwards. Thomas Brennan had been a professional driver for Cascade Logistics for 14 years, running routes throughout the Pacific Northwest. He was known for his reliability and his ability to navigate the region's challenging terrain and weather conditions. On October 29, 2021, Thomas picked up a load of construction equipment in Spokane, Washington, destined for a job site near Eugene, Oregon. The route would take him south and west through central Oregon, approximately a 10-hour drive. He departed Spokane at 4 a.m., planning to reach Eugene by mid-afternoon. The first several hours were routine, traveling south on Highway 195, then west on I-90 toward the Oregon border. Dawn broke as he crossed into Oregon, revealing clear skies and light traffic. Thomas grabbed coffee at a truck stop in Pendleton and continued southwest on Highway 395, entering the increasingly rural landscape of central Oregon. Near the town of John Day, Thomas needed to refuel. He pulled into a small station, filled his tanks, used the restroom, and checked his cargo security. Everything was proper. He consulted his GPS for the route ahead. Continue west on Highway 26 through the Ochoco National Forest, then south on Highway 97, before finally heading west again toward Eugene. Straightforward enough, though the forest section would be 2 hours of winding mountain roads. Thomas entered the Ochoco National Forest around noon. The highway twisted through dense pine forest, climbing and descending in a series of curves. Traffic was minimal. Thomas saw perhaps 5 other vehicles in the first hour. The forest was beautiful but isolating, with walls of trees blocking any view beyond the immediate roadside. Something caught his attention about 30 minutes into the forest section. A landmark, a large boulder beside the road, distinctively shaped like a seated bear. Thomas noted it because his grandfather had taken him camping in these forests as a child, and he remembered that specific rock. They'd called it Bear Boulder. 20 minutes later, he saw it again. The same boulder, same location relative to the road, same angle. Thomas frowned. There couldn't be 2 identical boulders. He must have gotten confused about distances, but his odometer showed he'd traveled 18 miles since first seeing it. He couldn't have circled back somehow without noticing. He continued driving, paying closer attention now. He passed a turnout with a Forest Service information board, then a small bridge over a creek, then a section where the road ran alongside a particularly steep drop-off, all noted and remembered. 15 miles later, he passed the Forest Service turnout again. Same board, same location. The bridge followed 5 minutes later, then the drop-off section. Thomas pulled over, heart rate increasing. This was impossible. He'd been driving steadily west according to his compass and GPS. Yet he was passing the same landmarks repeatedly, suggesting he was traveling in a loop. But Highway 26 through the forest didn't loop. It was a straight shot west to the town of Prineville. He checked his GPS. The blue dot showed him progressing west along Highway 26. He'd traveled 37 miles into the forest. The map showed he should be near a junction with Forest Road 22. But when Thomas looked for the junction, he saw only unbroken forest and the continuing highway. No side roads, no junction, nothing matching the GPS. Thomas continued driving, now actively watching for the Bear Boulder. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, there it was, third sighting of the same landmark. He'd now driven approximately 60 miles since entering the forest, but had somehow returned to the same location 3 times. Yet his fuel gauge showed he'd burned fuel. His odometer showed distance traveled. The GPS insisted he'd made steady westward progress. He tried the CB radio. Static. Cell phone, no signal expected in the deep forest. He was alone with an impossible situation, trapped in some kind of loop that defied navigation and measurement. Thomas made a decision. He'd turn around, drive back east, return to John Day, and take a different route. Whatever was happening on this stretch of Highway 26, he'd avoid it. He found a wide spot and carefully turned his truck around, now facing east. He began driving back the way he'd come. According to all logic, he should retrace his path, pass the same landmarks in reverse order, and eventually emerge from the forest at its eastern edge near John Day. After 20 miles of eastward travel, Thomas saw the Bear Boulder. He'd been driving east, but the boulder appeared on the same side of the road as before in the same orientation. That should be impossible. If he was truly reversing course, it should appear on the opposite side. He continued east. The Forest Service turnout appeared in the same position as always. The bridge, the drop-off, all in the same position, suggesting he was still traveling west despite driving east. Thomas's mind reeled. Direction had lost meaning. East and west had become the same. No matter which way he drove, he progressed through the same loop of highway, passing the same landmarks in the same order. The forest was eating him, digesting him slowly in its looping gut. He tried driving faster, pushing to 60 miles per hour on the winding highway, hoping speed might somehow break him free. The landmarks blurred past. Boulder, turnout, bridge, drop-off, repeat. Boulder, turnout, bridge, drop-off, repeat. A rhythm that mocked him, proving that distance and direction were meaningless here. Thomas tried driving slower at 30 miles per hour, studying every detail of the roadside for something different, some variation that might reveal a way out. But the loop was perfect. Every tree, every rock, every curve was identical on each pass. Or perhaps it wasn't identical. Perhaps it was literally the same stretch of road, and he was somehow traveling it over and over despite moving in a continuous line. Hours passed. Thomas's fuel gauge dropped from 3/4 to half to 1/4. He'd burned through nearly a full tank driving nowhere. The sun began setting, casting long shadows through the forest. Thomas had been trapped for over 6 hours, driving endlessly through the same 2-mile stretch of highway without escape. As darkness fell, Thomas saw headlights approaching from ahead. Finally, another vehicle. Someone who might explain what was happening, help him escape, prove he wasn't insane. Thomas slowed, preparing to stop and flag down the other driver. The vehicle passed, a truck identical to his own. Same color, same company logo, same cargo. The driver was visible for just a moment in the cab lights. Thomas saw himself. Same weathered face, same beard, same terrified expression. The other truck disappeared around a curve. Thomas understood then. He wasn't just looping through space. He was encountering himself at different points in the loop, seeing his own truck from earlier or later passes. Time and distance had collapsed into something else, trapping him in a closed circuit where cause and effect no longer functioned. He stopped his truck in the middle of the highway, engine idling, hazard lights flashing. If he was stuck in a loop, maybe stopping would break it. Maybe remaining stationary would force reality to resolve the paradox. Thomas sat in his cab and waited. Nothing changed. The forest remained. The road remained. After 30 minutes, Thomas saw headlights approaching from behind. He watched in his mirror as his own truck drove up and stopped behind him, hazard lights flashing identically. The other version of him, or was it another driver trapped in the same loop, sat in the cab, visible in the mirror, staring forward. Thomas got out and walked back to the other truck. As he approached, it faded, becoming translucent, then disappearing entirely. He was alone on the highway again. But when he returned to his cab and looked in the mirror, the other truck had returned, parked behind him, driver visible in the cab. Thomas started driving again. There had to be an exit. Every loop had a break point. Every closed circuit had a flaw. He just needed to find it. He drove carefully now, examining every inch of the roadside, looking for anything unusual, a trail, a gap in the trees, a road sign, anything that might indicate a way out. On his 47th pass through the loop, he'd started counting after realizing he was trapped. Thomas saw something different. A small dirt road branching off into the forest, barely visible between trees. He'd never seen it before despite passing this spot dozens of times. The road appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized specifically for him. Thomas took the turn without hesitation. Anything was better than the endless loop. The dirt road was rough, barely wide enough for his truck, branches scraping against the trailer. He drove slowly, following the winding path deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker, older, more massive. The road became rougher, degrading until it was barely distinguishable from the forest floor. The truck couldn't continue. Thomas stopped and sat in the darkness, surrounded by ancient trees, no GPS signal, no cell service, no CB radio response. He traded one trap for another, exchanging the looping highway for a dead end in the forest depths. Or perhaps this was the exit and he just needed to wait. Dawn came. Thomas had spent the entire night parked in the forest, dozing fitfully, starting awake at every sound. With daylight, he could see that the road continued ahead, though in terrible condition. He decided to attempt backing out to the highway, but when he looked behind him, the road he'd driven was gone. Just unbroken forest, as if the path had sealed itself behind him. Thomas had no choice but to continue forward. He drove carefully over ruts and roots, wincing at every scrape and impact. After a mile, the forest began to thin. Light appeared ahead. Thomas accelerated slightly, desperate to escape the claustrophobic press of trees. He emerged onto pavement, a highway, 2 lanes, proper markings. A green sign appeared, Prineville 23 miles. Thomas almost sobbed with relief. He was west of the forest, on the far side, exactly where he should have been hours ago. He'd somehow driven through the impossible loop and emerged in the correct location. His GPS reactivated, showing him on Highway 26 west of the Ochoko National Forest. His phone showed signal. The CB radio crackled with normal traffic chatter. Everything was functioning. Thomas continued to Prineville, delivered his load to Eugene, and drove straight home to Spokane. He told his dispatcher he needed a week off. During that week, Thomas researched the Ochoko National Forest. He found scattered references to loop roads and lost highways, stretches where travelers become disoriented, report driving in circles, or claim time and distance stop making sense. The Forest Service attributed such reports to navigation errors in the dense forest, but Thomas found enough similar accounts to know better. He learned that the forest is ancient, predating human roads by millennia. Some reports suggested the land resents the highways cut through it, occasionally asserting itself and reclaiming travelers who use those roads. The loop he'd experienced wasn't a navigation error. It was the forest refusing to let him pass, trapping him in a closed circuit until he found the only exit, a path the forest itself provided, deeper and more primal than any human road. Thomas still drives trucks, but he refuses routes through central Oregon. He takes longer paths, adds hours to his trips, pays for extra fuel, anything to avoid the Ochoko National Forest. Because he knows the loop is still there, waiting on Highway 26 between John Day and Prineville. And he knows that the exit he found might not appear for the next trapped traveler. Some will drive that loop until their fuel runs out. Some will see themselves coming and going. Some will never escape the forest that has decided not to let them pass. Thomas was fortunate. He found the hidden exit, but the road that goes backwards is still there, still looping, still waiting for the next driver who enters the Ochoko forest and finds that west and east mean nothing, that distance is an illusion, and that some roads lead nowhere except back to themselves forever. Story 9. The truck stop that SERVED tomorrow. Vincent Hargrove had been driving coast-to-coast runs for 18 years, specializing in tight deadline deliveries that required pushing through fatigue and weather. He was known among dispatchers as someone who always delivered on time, no matter what. On April 7, 2022, Vincent picked up a load of pharmaceuticals in Newark, New Jersey, bound for a distributor in Sacramento, California. The delivery window was tight, 72 hours coast to coast, which was aggressive but achievable if everything went smoothly. Vincent departed Newark at midnight, planning to make it to Iowa by the end of his first driving shift. He pushed through Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana without incident, making good time, staying ahead of schedule. By 2 a.m. on April 8th, he was crossing into Illinois, beginning to feel the fatigue of 14 hours behind the wheel. He needed to stop for his mandatory rest break. Near the town of Morris, Illinois, Vincent saw a truck stop he didn't recognize. Tomorrow's Rest, according to the large neon sign. The place was brightly lit, modern-looking, with a large parking lot and what appeared to be a full-service restaurant. Vincent didn't recall this stop from previous runs through Illinois, but truck stops came and went, and it had been 6 months since his last trip through this area. He pulled into the lot, finding ample space despite at least 30 other trucks already parked. The facility looked brand new, fresh pavement, clean buildings, modern LED lighting. Vincent parked, performed his walk-around inspection, then headed into the main building to use the restroom and grab a meal before his mandatory 8-hour rest period. The interior was impressive: spacious dining area, clean restrooms, well-stocked convenience store, even a small lounge with recliners for resting drivers. A handful of truckers sat in the dining area, eating and drinking coffee. Everything seemed normal and professional. Vincent ordered a burger and coffee from the friendly waitress, then settled into a booth to eat and review his route plan for the next day. The burger arrived quickly, and Vincent took a bite while pulling out his phone to check messages. His dispatcher had sent him an update. Load delivered successfully to Sacramento. Great work. Vincent frowned at the message. That made no sense. He was still in Illinois, nearly 2,000 miles from Sacramento. He typed back, "Wrong driver, I haven't delivered yet, still en route." He finished his burger and ordered a second coffee. The waitress returned with the coffee and his bill. Vincent glanced at the receipt, dated April 10th, 2022, 2 days in the future. "Hey, your register has the wrong date," Vincent said, pointing at the receipt. The waitress looked at it and smiled. "Nope, that's correct, April 10th. Vincent felt uneasy. "No, today is April 8th. The waitress shook her head. "You must be tired, honey. It's April 10th. You've been driving too long." Vincent pulled out his phone to show her the date, but his phone now displayed April 10th, 2022, 4:47 a.m. That couldn't be right. He just checked it minutes ago when reading the dispatcher's message, and it had shown April 8th. He looked around the diner at the other truckers. They were eating, talking, reading, all behaving normally. Vincent stood up and walked to a trucker sitting alone at the counter. "Excuse me, what's today's date?" The trucker looked at him oddly. "April 10th. You okay, buddy?" Vincent felt panic rising. "But it was April 8th when I pulled in here. It was just April 8th. The trucker studied him. "When did you pull in?" Vincent checked his watch, a traditional analog watch his father had given him, no digital date display. The time showed 4:50 a.m., but he couldn't tell what day it was. "About an hour ago, I think, maybe less." The trucker shook his head. "You've been here longer than that. I saw your truck when I pulled in yesterday evening. It's been parked in the same spot for at least 24 hours. Vincent ran outside to his truck, same spot where he'd parked. But now there was a parking ticket on his windshield, a warning that he'd exceeded the 24-hour maximum stay and needed to move the vehicle. The ticket was dated April 9th, issued at 3 p.m. Vincent's hands shook as he climbed into his cab. His truck's electronic logs told an impossible story. According to the system, he'd been parked at this location for 37 hours. The last recorded driving was at 2:17 a.m. on April 8th, when he'd pulled into Tomorrow's Rest. Since then, nothing. No driving, no activity, just 37 hours of stationary parking. But Vincent's memory insisted he'd just arrived an hour ago. He remembered pulling in, walking to the diner, ordering food, eating. None of that should have taken more than an hour. Where had the other 36 hours gone? And the dispatcher's message about the load being delivered, that was impossible because Vincent still had the load. He walked around to check the trailer, needing to confirm the cargo was still there. The trailer was empty. The sealed locks had been cut. The pharmaceutical cargo was gone. According to the paperwork in his cab, the load had been delivered to Sacramento on time, signed for by the distributors, receiving manager, full payment processed. Vincent had apparently driven from Illinois to California, delivered the load, and driven back to Illinois, all while parked at Tomorrow's Rest for 37 hours. Vincent walked back into the truck stop, his mind reeling. He approached the counter where a different employee now stood, a middle-aged man with glasses. "I need to know what's happening here. Where am I? What is this place?" The man smiled calmly. "You're at Tomorrow's Rest. We serve truckers who need to make up time. You arrived on April 8th, needed to reach Sacramento by April 9th, so we helped you out." "How? I've been parked here. My truck hasn't moved." The man shrugged. "Your truck was wherever it needed to be. You delivered your load. You got paid. What's the problem?" Vincent slammed his hand on the counter. "The problem is I don't remember any of it. I lost 2 days. What did you do to me?" The man's expression didn't change. "You used our services. You needed to save time. That's what we provide, time you don't have to experience. We handle the driving, the delivery, everything. You get to rest while your truck completes the run. Most drivers are grateful." Vincent backed away. "I didn't agree to that. I didn't ask for that." The man consulted a logbook. "You came here, you ate our food, that's agreement enough." Vincent ran to his truck, started the engine, and accelerated out of the parking lot. He had to get away from this place, had to get back to reality. He drove east on I-80, watching the mile markers, confirming he was actually moving and not trapped in another impossible situation. His phone rang, his dispatcher. "Vincent. Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you for 2 days." There was a problem. I'm heading back now." The dispatcher sighed with relief. "Well, the important thing is the load got delivered on time. The client was happy, but you need to answer your phone, man. I thought something happened to you." Vincent wanted to explain, wanted to describe Tomorrow's Rest and the missing time and the impossible delivery, but he knew how insane it would sound. He drove straight back to his company's terminal in Newark, turned in his truck and requested a meeting with his supervisor. He explained everything: the truck stop, the missing time, the empty trailer. He showed them the parking ticket, the electronic logs, the delivery confirmation. His supervisor listened carefully, then pulled up the company's GPS tracking data. According to the GPS, Vincent's truck had traveled from Morris, Illinois to Sacramento, California between April 8th and April 9th, making the delivery on schedule. The GPS showed every mile, every turn, every stop. Vincent had apparently driven the entire route at legal speeds with appropriate rest breaks. The data was complete and consistent. The delivery signature was authentic. Everything checked out except Vincent's memory. "I think you need some time off," his supervisor said gently. "You've been pushing hard for months. Sometimes when we're overtired, we have episodes of lost time, confusion. It's called highway hypnosis or microsleeps. You probably drove that entire route on autopilot and don't remember it. It happens." Vincent knew that wasn't what had happened, but he accepted the explanation because he had no alternative that made sense. He took 2 weeks off and spent that time researching Tomorrow's Rest. He found no truck stop by that name in Morris, Illinois. No business registration, no commercial listing, no reviews or references anywhere. He drove back to the location and found a closed, abandoned truck stop with a faded sign reading, "Jerry's Fuel and Food, closed 2015. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown. No sign of recent use. But Vincent found other stories online. Truckers describing stops where time didn't work correctly, where they parked for what felt like minutes but hours or days passed, where their trucks somehow completed runs without the driver's conscious participation. One trucker wrote, "I stopped at a place called Tomorrow's Rest in Nevada. Went in for coffee. Came out and 2 days were gone. My load had been delivered, but I don't remember driving it." Another account from 2019. "Lost time at a truck stop in Kansas called Tomorrow's Rest. I was 3 days behind schedule when I pulled in. When I left, I was 2 days ahead. My logs show I drove those days, but I have no memory. The food tasted wrong, like it was made from something that wasn't really food." Vincent realized he wasn't alone. Tomorrow's rest wasn't a single location. It appeared in different states, different highways, wherever a driver needed to make up time. It offered a transaction. Trade your memory, trade your conscious experience, and your load will be delivered. Something else would drive your truck, use your body, complete the run. You'd wake up with lost days and an empty trailer and no explanation. Vincent quit long-haul trucking. He couldn't risk encountering tomorrow's rest again. He took a job driving local deliveries, home every night, no more cross-country runs. Because he learned that some shortcuts come at a price. Some places offer to save you time by taking your time, by making you a passenger in your own life, by using you as a vehicle for something else to accomplish its unknowable purposes. He still has the parking ticket from April 9th, the one issued while he was supposedly parked at tomorrow's rest, but also simultaneously delivering cargo in California. He keeps it as a reminder that some truck stops serve more than food and fuel. They serve tomorrow, a tomorrow you won't remember experiencing, a tomorrow that happens without you, a tomorrow where your truck drives itself and something else looks out through your eyes and the miles pass in an instant while days vanish. The sign still blinks somewhere on America's highways. Tomorrow's rest, next exit. And tired drivers still pull in, desperate to make their deadlines, willing to trade anything for a few extra hours. They order food that tastes wrong. They rest in beds that feel like nowhere. They wake up days later with empty trailers and full bank accounts and no memory of the time between. And tomorrow's rest moves to the next highway, the next exit, waiting for the next driver who needs tomorrow to arrive without having to experience today. Story 10. The convoy that wasn't alive. Marcus Webb had been driving for Western Freight Solutions for 22 years, primarily running routes through the desert Southwest. He was experienced with the isolation, the heat, the long stretches of empty highway where you might not see another vehicle for hours. On September 14, 2022, Marcus picked up a load of industrial parts in Phoenix, Arizona, bound for a manufacturing plant in Las Vegas, Nevada. The route along Highway 93 was one he'd driven hundreds of times, approximately 4 hours through desert landscape that most people found desolate but Marcus appreciated for its stark beauty. He departed Phoenix at 11 p.m., planning to reach Las Vegas around 3 a.m. and catch a few hours of sleep before making the delivery at 8 a.m. The night was clear and moonless, the desert darkness absolute beyond his headlights. Traffic was sparse. Marcus saw perhaps 3 vehicles in the first hour, all heading south toward Phoenix while he traveled north. Near Wickenburg, Marcus noticed headlights in his mirrors. Another truck closing the distance from behind. Not unusual. Many truckers ran these routes at night to avoid the brutal desert heat. The truck pulled into the left lane and accelerated to pass Marcus. As it drew alongside, Marcus glanced over at the cab. The truck looked old, a 1980s model judging by the style, but in pristine condition as if it had just rolled off the assembly line. The trailer was a standard box truck painted a faded blue, but what caught Marcus's attention was the driver. The cab interior was illuminated, and Marcus could see the driver clearly. A man in his 50s wearing a plaid shirt, staring straight ahead with no expression, hands on the wheel in perfect 10 and 2 position. The driver never glanced at Marcus, didn't wave, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge another driver's presence at all. The truck completed its pass and pulled back into the right lane ahead of Marcus, maintaining exactly 65 miles per hour. Marcus shrugged off the oddness. Some drivers weren't social. It happened. 5 minutes later, another truck appeared in Marcus's mirrors, approaching from behind. It pulled alongside to pass, another vintage truck, 1980s model, pristine condition, same faded blue trailer. The driver was different, younger, but wore the same style plaid shirt and had the same expressionless face, same perfect hand position, same absolute focus forward. The second truck completed its pass and pulled in front of Marcus, maintaining exact position behind the first truck. The two vehicles traveled in perfect formation, exactly 3 truck lengths apart, both at precisely 65 miles per hour. Marcus found this noteworthy. Maintaining such exact spacing and speed required significant concentration and was unusual for independent drivers. A third truck appeared. Same vintage, same condition, same blue trailer, same style of driver. It passed Marcus and joined the formation ahead, maintaining the same 3 truck length spacing. Then a fourth, then a fifth. Within 20 minutes, Marcus found himself following a convoy of 12 identical trucks, all perfectly spaced, all traveling at exactly 65 miles per hour, all driven by expressionless men in plaid shirts who never varied their speed or position by even a fraction. Marcus tried his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Western Star following the convoy northbound on 93. What's your freight line?" Static. He tried again on different channels. More static. The trucks ahead showed no CB antennas, which was odd. Most long-haul drivers used CBs for communication and traffic updates. The convoy maintained its formation through the curves and grades of Highway 93, never varying. Marcus tried slowing down to put distance between himself and the mysterious trucks, but every time he did, the last truck in the convoy also slowed, maintaining the same relative distance behind the rest. Marcus tried speeding up to pass the entire convoy, but when he accelerated, all 12 trucks simultaneously increased speed to match, preventing him from passing while still maintaining their exact internal spacing. Marcus was being escorted, or herded. The convoy ahead and the truck directly in front of him created a corridor he couldn't escape. The realization triggered deep unease. He considered stopping completely, letting the convoy continue without him, but something about their behavior suggested they wouldn't allow that. If he stopped, they'd stop. If he turned around, they'd turn around. They were keeping him with them, taking him somewhere. Near Wickiup, the lead truck signaled right and took an exit. The entire convoy followed in perfect sequence, each truck signaling at the exact same distance from the exit, taking the turn at the exact same speed. Marcus had no choice but to follow. The truck directly ahead of him had taken the exit, and pulling back onto the highway seemed impossible without passing through the convoy, which he'd already learned he couldn't do. The exit led to a narrow 2-lane road heading east into the desert. No signs indicated what this road served. No lights suggested any destination, just empty darkness and pavement degrading into rough condition. The convoy continued in formation, now traveling at exactly 45 miles per hour to accommodate the road's condition. Marcus grabbed his phone to check GPS. No signal. The CB remained static. He was following 12 mysterious trucks down an unmarked desert road with no communication and no idea where it led. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to turn around, to refuse to continue. But something deeper, some primitive survival sense, told him that stopping would be worse, that the trucks would force compliance in ways he didn't want to discover. After 10 miles, buildings appeared in the headlights. Not a town, more like an industrial complex. Large warehouses, loading docks, storage tanks. Everything looked old but maintained. Equipment and structures from decades ago still in functional condition. The complex was lit with sodium vapor lights that cast everything in sickly orange illumination. The convoy pulled into the complex, each truck taking a position at a specific loading dock, parking with mechanical precision. Marcus followed, pulling into the only remaining empty dock position. The moment he stopped, the other trucks shut off their engines in perfect synchronization. Then the drivers emerged from their cabs. All 12 drivers looked identical. Not similar, identical. Same face, same build, same plaid shirt, same jeans and work boots. They moved in perfect unison, walking to the back of their trailers, opening the doors, preparing to unload. They never spoke, never looked at each other, never deviated from synchronized movement. Marcus sat in his cab, frozen with terror. These weren't people. They were something else: copies, androids, entities that had taken human form but hadn't mastered individual variation. They were uncanny, almost right but fundamentally wrong, and they expected him to join them to unload his cargo to become part of their operation. One of the identical men walked to Marcus's truck and knocked on the window. Up close, Marcus could see that while the face appeared human, the eyes were wrong, too symmetrical, too unblinking, reflecting light like animal eyes. The man gestured toward the trailer, indicating Marcus should open it and begin unloading. Marcus shook his head. The man continued gesturing more insistently. Marcus locked the door and started his engine. He wasn't unloading. He wasn't participating. He was leaving. The man's expression didn't change. No surprise, no anger, just that same blank stare. But the other 11 identical men stopped their work and turned to face Marcus's truck. All 12 began walking toward him in perfect step. Marcus threw the transmission into gear and accelerated, pulling away from the dock. The identical men didn't run or pursue. They just watched as he navigated the complex, searching for the exit. The road he'd entered on was blocked by several of the blue trucks, parked bumper to bumper to prevent passage. Marcus circled the complex, looking for another way out. He found a gate on the far side, partially open, leading to a dirt road that disappeared into desert darkness. Marcus aimed for it, pushing his speed as much as he dared on the rough ground. The gate passed on either side and he was out, bouncing along a primitive road with no idea where it led. Behind him, headlights appeared. The convoy was pursuing, 12 sets of lights maintaining perfect formation even on the rough desert track. But they weren't gaining. They maintained the same distance, the same formation, not trying to catch him but simply following, herding him toward some unknown destination. Marcus spotted pavement ahead, a highway crossing the desert floor. He couldn't tell which highway, but it was salvation. He pushed the truck to maximum speed, slamming onto the pavement and turning north, accelerating away from the pursuing convoy. He watched his mirrors. The 12 sets of headlights reached the pavement and stopped. The convoy didn't follow onto the highway. They just sat there at the intersection, idling, watching Marcus disappear into the distance. Marcus drove for another hour before daring to stop at a well-lit truck stop in Kingman, Arizona. Other trucks, other people, blessed normalcy. He stumbled into the bathroom and splashed water on his face, trying to calm his racing heart. When he came out, he asked the cashier about the industrial complex east of Wickiup. The cashier looked confused. "There's nothing out that way. Just empty desert. Used to be a mining operation way back in the 60s, but it's been abandoned for decades." Marcus pulled out his phone and searched for satellite imagery of the area. The images showed ruins, collapsed buildings, rusted equipment, structures that had been derelict for 50 years. No functional complex, no loading docks, no sodium vapor lights. Just abandoned industrial ruins reclaimed by the desert. But Marcus had been there. He'd seen the functioning complex, the synchronized drivers, the fleet of pristine vintage trucks. He checked his electronic logs. According to his truck's GPS, he'd driven straight from Phoenix to Kingman on Highway 93 with no deviation. The system showed no record of the exit he'd taken, the road through the desert, the hours he'd spent following the convoy. Marcus continued to Las Vegas, delivered his load, then requested a week off. He spent that time researching the old mining operation east of Wickiup. He found references to a facility that had closed in 1968 after a series of fatal accidents. 12 workers had died when a tunnel collapsed. The company had abandoned the site immediately, leaving equipment and structures in place. He found an old newspaper article with a grainy photograph of the workers killed in the accident. 12 men standing in front of trucks. Marcus's blood turned cold. He recognized them. The same face he'd seen repeated 12 times. The article explained that the workers had all been from the same family, brothers, cousins, one father and son. They looked remarkably similar, the article noted, enough that people sometimes couldn't tell them apart. Marcus understood then. The convoy wasn't people. It was an echo, a repetition, something that continued to operate decades after the actual people had died. The 12 identical drivers were the 12 dead workers, somehow persisting, continuing their routines, unable or unwilling to stop working. And they tried to recruit Marcus into their eternal shift, to add him to their crew, to trap him in the same mindless operation they'd been running for 54 years. Marcus changed his routes. He never drove Highway 93 between Phoenix and Las Vegas again. He heard from other drivers about occasionally seeing a convoy of old blue trucks traveling in perfect formation, always at night, always through that stretch of desert. Drivers who followed the convoy sometimes disappeared for hours, arriving at their destinations with no memory of the time between and their cargo mysteriously unloaded at facilities that don't exist. The convoy is still out there, traveling the desert highways, maintaining its formation, looking for new drivers to recruit into its ranks. The 12 dead workers continue their endless shift, unable to rest, unable to stop, trapped in the routine that killed them. And sometimes they need help with their eternal workload, so they herd solo drivers off the highway, guide them to the complex that exists and doesn't exist, try to add them to the crew that works forever in the ruins of the 1968 mining operation. Marcus Webb escaped, but he knows others haven't been so fortunate. He wonders how many drivers have been absorbed into that convoy, how many now drive those vintage trucks with expressionless faces and perfect hand positions, trapped in synchronized repetition for decades. The convoy that was alive continues its routes through the Southwest, and if you see 12 blue trucks in perfect formation traveling at exactly 65 miles per hour, don't follow them. Don't let them box you in. Don't take the unmarked exit near Wickiup. Because some convoys never reach their destination, and some shifts never end, and some highways lead not to cities, but to places where the dead still work and the clock stopped in 1968, and new drivers are always needed to replace the ones who are finally, mercifully, forgetting how to be human.